Welcome to the Salience Podcast, where we identify what stands out from all the noise.
Hello, everyone. This is the first episode of the Salience Podcast that I am hosting. And in this session, I am privileged to be joined by Jessie Xia, who is currently the Global Chief Information Officer of Thoughtworks. Thoughtworks is a global technology company with over 50 offices in 18 countries and is a leader in technology consultancy that integrates strategy, design, and software engineering to enable enterprises across the globe to thrive as modern digital businesses. Jessie has been with Thoughtworks for 17 years now, starting off as hire number 7 in its China office to becoming head of operations in China before she moved to Singapore in 2016 to support Thoughtworks' setup of its Southeast Asia operations as its managing director, to now becoming its new Global CIO. She is also a full council member at SG Tech, Singapore's leading trade association for its technology industry. Jessie actively supports DEI initiatives for women in tech. Coupling Jessie's experiences with Thoughtworks, her international operations, and its very strong culture, as well as its work with different clients, I believe we're in for a really interesting conversation today around the many aspects of culture, management, and its nuances in and across organizations. Welcome, Jessie, to the Salience Podcast.
Hi, Jen. I'm very honored to be here to discuss and share my views.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm so excited to get straight into learning more about your experiences. But before we get there, I really would love to understand a bit more about you. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how it is that you became who you are today? What are some of your cultural influences?
Sure. So as you mentioned, my current role, I'm the Global CIO for Thoughtworks. I just started this role about 2.5 months ago because our current CIO is retiring next year. So we're currently in the transition period. But in the past, as you mentioned, I have been in Thoughtworks for 17 years. It's a long time. But I have been doing so many different roles. So maybe I'll share a little bit about my background. So even before Thoughtworks, I have been working with all the tech companies throughout my career for totally about 26 years. The first company was a very local Chinese company, tech company, and also the second one is more a software company. But actually, my education background wasn't in tech, so I studied accounting in college. So I started some very basic junior roles in my first company, but over the years, I was given a lot of opportunities to try different things. And in about 2005, I joined Thoughtworks. That's a lot more new challenges. I think previously we discussed, shared about many challenges for me. One is I never worked for a multinational company before Thoughtworks. So join Thoughtworks, I have to using English in many of my conversations with my global colleagues. So that was a big challenge, but really with the help from my colleagues, I overcome that challenges. The other things, every time I change roles, and some of the roles are really unrelated, not too much related to my previous role. So I had to start learning a lot of new things. For example, when I switched from the head of people role, which is kind of a HR director role, to a consulting role, working closely with the software developers. That was a really big shift, but that was mostly because of my leadership development, which was supported by the company. It's just trying to expand my capability to the broader areas to create more opportunities for the future. So those kind of things give me a lot of challenges. And also, you mentioned about I transferred to Singapore to be the MD, went to a new country to be the top boss in a country, which you can think about the challenges I was facing, but it has been a very rewarding experience. So I think in the future is, as I just took on the role 2.5 months ago, there's a lot of new challenges again. It's a very large team across the globe. So one of the immediate challenges is the time zone. So I have teams almost in every country. And so you mentioned about we have 18 countries, 19, I think sometimes, we are just opening new offices. So have team members almost in every country. And how we communicate, how I can build a high-performing team. Also, even we are a tech consulting company, but we ourselves also need to continue to have our own digital transformation. So this is really one of my biggest responsibilities. So that's a little bit about my background.
Amazing. And you've provided us, I think, such an interesting, big fodder to choose from, because there's so many questions around there that have evolved from just your description of your background there. So you've mentioned now that you shifted recently from a role which is more linked to people development into, more frontline, working with clients as a consultant. Could you share a little bit about what motivated that shift? Because I know in conversations that we have had in the past, that was something that you initiated. You wanted to move out of that more leadership role into more frontline role. And that's not common. So I would really love to understand what motivated that for you, as well as, you mentioned some of the challenges that you experienced. What were some of those? If you could share some experiences, it'd be really helpful.
Yeah, so there are 2 times I stepped down from management roles and went to really frontline roles for certain reasons. So one thing you mentioned about switching from HR to a frontline professional service role, that was in 2009, I think. And it was the first time in Thoughtworks, I was in the head of people role. And then I was, selected for a global leadership development. I had a coach and we had many one-on-one conversations. And finally, he said, you actually had more potential than you are doing now. Do you consider to expand that a little bit? And so we discussed back and forth, and there's something I could try is really completely shift my role to the main business. Because when I was doing the people role, it's more like an operations role, is supporting them. But if I go to the professional service role, working as a technology consultant, that's our main business. So then I'll get a really exposure to how we run a business, how we serve the client, and it create a possibility for me to do a lot more things. And I was like, that sounds a really big challenge. But finally, I think this is the right thing to do. So I discussed with the managing director at that time, and he was very supportive as well. So then we planned to hire another person to take over from me for the head of people role. And I just stepped down, left the management team, and became a business analyst. And later I was also project manager, program manager for the larger software development team. So I think that was really rewarding, even very difficult. And but sometimes you take the risk, right? There's a big chance you can have some big earn as well. So that was the part I really have got a chance to learn a lot of different things with my previous experience in operations. So I was able to do much bigger things. For example, after the working in the professional service role for several years, even played multiple roles inside the team, like a BA, PM, or a client principal as well. And later I was selected as a general manager for Beijing office. It's really kind of utilizing both my operations experience knowledge and also my professional service experience as well. So those kind of things are, you took a risk, but you got something, much bigger in the future. So that was one time. So the second time was the most recent, right? So you and I had a conversation, which I stepped down from the managing director role and to a consulting role again. That was many people asked, are you crazy? Again, I was, I'm thinking, I have been doing the management role for continuously about 8 years, including the head of operations role in China and also about 5 years in Southeast Asia for the MD role. So I feel like, what's my next step, right? So I could certainly continue to do the MD role, and we were expanding, we're growing the business. But I feel like, let me try something different to bring a different view. And then the other thing, because when I moved to Singapore, I have never really worked a very hands-on manner with clients here. So I was working with clients in a hands-on manner. When I was in China, I worked with global clients, local clients, but never had a chance to work with Singapore clients, Thailand clients. I feel like, I know things are different. I talk to the team, but you always just get a second hand of information, or you talk to the client executives, and then from their view, I said, let me try. I go to really work in the team and doing consulting for them to see what kind of things really make them struggle and what are the truths on the ground, how I can help them, even leveraging the experience to help my colleagues who are doing the professional service role in a better way. So I decided to do that. And I think I was always preparing, I will grow and I'll grow my team. So the team was really very solid at the time. Also, I grew another managing director. So I just discussed with CEO. I said, that's the right time. I want to move on something else. And then you also know my co-MD, which I invited him to join me 2 years ago. And he was really ready to continue with the role on himself. He's a really excellent person. So then we made a change. I went back to PS role, professional service role, in January 2022. So I've been doing that for several months. And again, I have to restart learning a lot of things. Even in the past, I know a bit, but when you need to do consulting, you have to read deeply. Even Canadian model, right? I have to go back to read that again, because even I used before, but using for clients, you have to get a deeper knowledge and also combine with a lot of examples together. So it's very rewarding. But then again, I got a new opportunity, and then our current CEO are retiring. So I was called back to say, do you want to consider this role? So now I'm here again. I'm doing very different things than before.
That's wonderful. It's so interesting because I think, culturally, a lot of the narratives that we absorb and are told consistently about, professional development for a person tends to look very linear and upward. Right. And here you are, I think, giving a really excellent example of how actually careers and workplaces now really do lend themselves more to lateral, like sideways moves, and there isn't necessarily an up or downward, type of career pathway anymore. And it's really about expanding, your exposure, expanding what you're able to learn through, and then applying it across boundaries back to other spaces of the business. So I think that was a really wonderful example, and it's not common. So I think it's encouraging for people to hear that was your journey,
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, so certainly, I think I'll share a little bit as my friends, but I think my colleagues really know our culture. They know me. They don't really feel this is a crazy decision. But many of my friends did ask me. But I feel some people, they kind of hesitate to make this kind of decisions. One is you step down, right? How about your face, the ego, right? You don't have the title anymore. You don't have the power anymore. I mean, even for our organization, you have to use a lot of influence over power, but there are still power. I mean, I have to say that. So you lose that, you really just use your influence. It's a different. So are you able to lose that? And then you probably lose other things. I don't want to mention details, but you have to be ready. You need to lose these things if you want to expand your area sometimes. So I guess if you look at long-term, short-term lost, it's always not a big problem for me. I look long-term and also not to care about these kind of factors. So with this kind of mindset, you're able to try. If you're not ready to lose something, and I think that will be difficult.
I love what you just said, and it's such an interesting takeaway, right? That there is a difference between power and influence, because those two things tend to go together. But I think as well, because so much of the work and the organizations that we work with now, we recognize as complex organizations. And we also recognize that actually, no, the matrix structure is one thing, but there are always informal leaders that exert a lot more influence in the organization. So I'm really glad that you brought that one up, because it's such an important recognition to make as we work in increasingly complex organizations.
Yeah, totally agree.
So I want to sort of now benefit a little bit from your experience, because you've worked now both in China, which is a massive market, as well as then expanding Thoughtworks' operations into Southeast Asia. And I understand you've set up several offices around Southeast Asia now. So it's very interesting because people always talk about, when traditionally MNCs were seen as American or European countries expanding into the rest of the world. And there was talk a lot about, they need to, learn the lay of the land and adapt to the local culture. So you've had a very interesting experience that I'm aware of, because we've had some conversations that, of bringing operations, and Thoughtworks is a US company, but, starting from sort of a China office, bringing it into Southeast Asia. And then also, as now you're expanding across Southeast Asia, and as Chinese businesses are growing their reach, expanding Chinese operations into the rest of Southeast Asia. And I feel those types of stories are not told enough of. So I would really love to hear from you as you were setting up and managing across these operations. What were some experiences that you have had across these different regions and markets that you think are interesting to note?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very big question. Love to answer this question. So just one small correction. It's not really expanding the Chinese operations to Southeast Asia, because we're a global company. I was just happened to be one of the leaders selected to run this company in Southeast Asia, because sometime when we set up the new entity somewhere, we haven't got the ready local leader yet. So we do have an assignment, someone from this country to another country to help set up the business. And normally this person can continue to stay, or later we probably have a local leader. It's very flexible. So in that case, it's not really bringing all the Chinese operations to Southeast Asia. It is still run as the way for Southeast Asia. But I think you really brought up an interesting point. A lot of people struggle with as a multinational company, and also some companies they set up from the Western country. When they brought the business to the Asian countries, they have a lot of challenges. And people always say you need to learn the culture. You really need to localize things. I think those things, if you do it right, it's not that difficult. So, for example, the time when we set up the Chinese office, I was one of the very early employees. The time we had a colleague from US who was leading the office, and we also had another colleague who was supporting as a deputy MD, and he actually original from China, was educated in the US, worked in a company for a long time, and he was sent back to help with the setup. But by the way, he's now the global CEO. And so his name is Guo Xiao. So that time he was leading China. So actually, even in that, we had a lot of challenges as well, but we keep learning. The good thing is you make mistakes, but you don't stay there. You try to learn and also improve. Certainly you can localize something, but as the company, we generally have some key cultural characteristics. These things are really can apply to anywhere. But some other nuances, not too conflict with the basic value, culture, or some principles, totally fine. You can do a little bit your own way, and then you can actually share back your experience to other countries to even, China was maybe the fourth or fifth market we set up as a business, but China grew very fast, and they did a lot of great things, and the experience was brought and spread to other countries, and then many other countries do the same. Their experience are spreading other different countries. So if I talk about how to do this, I think the time I went from China to Southeast Asia, a big challenge for me. One is I didn't have to use English for my everyday working conversations, but suddenly 90% it's English, and also it's not only language. The other is there are a bit different culture between Singapore and China, and later we opened the Thailand office. Thailand also have a different culture, And actually this year, they just opened the Thailand office after I hand over the MD role. The Vietnam office. Vietnam also have a slightly different culture. So I think some key things is you build trust first. The other thing I really want to advocate for Thoughtworks is no matter how people talk about the culture, we have many different, we call key values. You can find those things on our website. But, ultimately, this is very high trust organization. So once people trust you, they're willing to be open to try new things and to share with you your feedback. So I think the time I came here, I know, I say there are many things we did well in China, but I shouldn't assume these things will run well in another country as well. So try to listen and understand and build trust. Once build trust, and Singapore actually willing to learn things from other countries, not only from China. And then we also have colleagues who are on assignment from multiple different countries. They all brought something very good. So some work here, some doesn't, or something maybe if you do the right way, they can work. If you don't do the right way, they don't work. So sometimes it's not that simple. And so in that way, we were able to absorb and use a lot of very good experience from different countries, not only China. And it's amazingly, I think Singapore is quite open to do things differently and adopt new things very fast as well. And Thailand similar. And in the same time, because I also had social activities outside in the business world, and also some observing other leaders. I do see some leaders even observing inside Thoughtworks or outside. I saw some leaders, the challenges they have about going to another country, not be able to operate well. It was really, they went there just trying to push everything they learn without listening. I think in that sense, you just set up for failure. If people don't trust you, you feel like they listen, they don't. And then in a meeting, they don't say no, but doesn't mean they commit to what you say or what they say. And so things don't get executed, and then they don't share the true feedback. So I think in this case, I know some people, they will blame their teams, but I think they should think about themselves too. If they do the right thing, those things can probably have a less chance to happen. So that's kind of my experience. I do see some of my colleagues, and they from one country, they're working really well as a leader, as leaders in other countries, which completely different cultures. And even I see some of the Western colleagues from, other Western countries, they're working in Thailand, Vietnam, they do really well, but also some struggle as well. So it's your openness, your listening skills, and leadership skills. So those are not easy skills to acquire, but it's teachable. Learnable. It's probably more appropriate word.
Oh, that's great. And again, there's so much there I want to dig into. The first one of which you've actually talked about trust, which is one of the topics that emerged in my conversation with Ian when we launched this season's podcast series on culture in business. And you've mentioned that, trust is really important. We have to cultivate it. I would love to get your perspective on this, because there's so many ways to think about it, and there's so many ways to understand trust. In your experience working across, again, these different cultures, these different offices that you've set up and run, what does trust taste or feel like, in your perspective and experience?
Yeah, so I think there are quite a few different articles, books talking about trust and mention about this. So one thing can really just came into my mind right now is a book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, because it's a pyramid layers, right? The fundamental one is I can't remember, lack of trust or something. So which means if you lack of trust, and then the dysfunction just continue to go to another layer. And so this kind of thing is, if people don't trust each other, they don't share the truth. And if they have some feedback, but they choose not to say, which the feedback can be very important. Things go wrong, don't say, or things even go right, they don't celebrate as well. So this kind of, you can see the teams not trust each other. But how to build trust? I think I remember another book called Trusted Advisor. There's a very interesting called the trustworthy equation. If you Google that, you can find the details. I think something related to your capability, credibility, or intimacy, but it can be divided by self-orientation. So you think about what you can contribute more to build trust, or what kind of thing you should do less, also contribute to trust as well, right? So in this way, I think for the book about 5 dysfunction teams, saying how we do that is as a leader, you need to go first. You need to do that first, right? Start trusting the others, and sometimes this kind of personal relationship also helps when you do the team meeting. Don't be too transactional. Really care about people. Allow people to share something beyond the day-to-day things, and then kind of remove, let people, the guard, just go down. So those things all could help. But I mean, as a leader, it play a really important role. If you're a leader, you don't really trying to create a trust to others, very hard to expect all your team members to do the same. So these things, yes, certainly, I think it's a very big topic. I'm just sharing something on the surface. But yeah, leaders go first. I would suggest.
Again, very valuable input there. I think I really love what you said about when there is no trust, the feedback doesn't get shared, and beyond that as well, the successes also don't get celebrated. It's something that I have observed working with some of my clients is people often talk about, oh, why isn't there feedback? Or when something doesn't go as planned and people say, oh, these were the issues. And somebody says, why didn't you call it out earlier when you saw it at the beginning? Right? So people wait for things to, I don't want to say fail, but not work before they feel like, okay, this has created a crack in the structure that allows me to voice an opinion. But beyond that is when things go well, they're also not celebrated because there is no sense of ownership in the team that they were executing on instruction, as opposed to actually feeling like they've owned the process and they own the outcome. So I think that was really useful in this concept of starting from yourself, right? It's so important. So I just want to, please share what you're comfortable sharing, as you've shared now all of these observations that you've made of how people have really good, some display really good, attitudes of coming into a new environment, wanting to hear from the people. Are there any real examples you can share with us of either really good or really bad, cross-cultural leadership?
I think, I tend to forget about those unhappy things. I always remember that's a great example because I want to encourage those great example. I think one of my colleagues, he is originally from Australia, and he actually he joined the Singapore team, and for several years. He's really a great person. And the time when we opened the Thailand office, we really need a leader. And he was senior enough. He was playing a kind of a leader role on a big project team. So we asked him whether he wants to go. He was happy to give a try. And then he went there. And because there are a lot of challenges on the ground, because Thailand, the culture is a bit different. When people not sharing with you feedback, it doesn't mean they don't have. They're just not comfortable, don't feel safe to share. And also the language barrier as well. So because initially we have to just speak in English, and before we set up a really good local leadership team. And so we did have some challenges about other people from different, Western country when they are, and found very hard to go too close to the local people. And then when their things go wrong, and then they didn't share. So that was a little bit frustrated. So this person, my colleague, who is original from Australia, so he went there. First, like I mentioned, he just trying to understand. He listened. He also pick up Thai. Even he still doesn't speak too much after spending several years there, but he can order food. It's a kind of gesture. It's an attitude about, I want to learn from you. He learned a lot of things. It's just people really like him. And he was able to, even he had the power in his hand, but he mostly using a lot of influence to help build a business and build a strong relationship with clients, and help to set up the local leadership team as well. So after several years, we actually built local Thai leadership. So they still work very closely. So I think this is a great example. And then currently this colleague, we just expanded his kind of influence to even supporting and leading the Vietnam office as well. So I think that's a really great example. I share with many internal colleagues about how great he did the job. Very flexible, listen, always go to find out truth before we actually really impose anything, right? Great thing. Because people, when they open, they trust you, they're willing to try, and then they feel safe. If things don't work out, they get a failure, and then they feel it's okay with that. So those kind of example, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think learning the local language is such a beautiful gesture. I agree. It's not that you necessarily have to become fluent, but I think people appreciate the attitude and the gesture. So it's so interesting because we've worked with a lot of organizations, and this idea, this concept of trust and psychological safety comes up so much across different organizations. And some of the things that have come up as well is the value of silence. So in Asia, they say, particularly in Asian communication, we're very comfortable with moments of silence, where it's okay, let's take some time to process what has been said. Let's think about what to say next. But there is this wonderful paper that compares the pauses that English speakers take and the pauses that non-English speakers take. And particularly, he said in Japan, it's very common to pause between comments and in between discussions. And that's a time for them to process, but also the pause, I think, provides space for people to share. So one of the things that I tell my clients is, are there sort of deliberate pauses or empty space that, where, as you've mentioned, right, how do we go beyond the transactional aspect of the meeting? How do we provide pregnant pauses so that things can emerge? Another practice that I've worked to incorporate with some of my clients as well is a rotating devil's advocate. So some organizations really have never had the experience or culture of sharing feedback. So one of the things that my client has done is I told him, why don't you have in your team, because he supports the managers that then go on to support the rest of the operations. So why don't you have them take on a rotating devil's advocate role? So every week it is one person's responsibility to point out essentially, how can this go wrong? What are we not considering? And that kind of ritualized aspect of bringing in constructive and critical feedback, I think really helped to shift the needle for them there as well.
Yeah, I think that's really appreciate your sharing. I'm, probably later you can share with me the link of the two articles. I'm really interested in reading more. And but I do have a similar examples here. So we always thinking about how we can make a more diverse view in the team, and which will be helpful for the innovation. So one thing, actually, the time when I was in MD, we tried something, and they're still doing, which every year we selected a few young people to the leadership team. It's a rotating role. They only do 1 year. So our standard is pretty simple. We just ask people to the current leadership team to nominate people who are having high performance in their current team, but they are relatively quite junior. And some people can be just 1 year after graduation, but we see the attitude. We see they want to contribute, and they want to learn, and they care beyond what they are doing every day. So we selected them to the leadership team. They have a very different angle because they still have their day-to-day job. What they do is they only join all the weekly leadership team meetings. And also sometimes we support them to run some initiatives inside of the office, some innovative initiatives or communication initiatives. So they can run town hall, or they can run some kind of other communication activities. So in that way, they really share back some of very different perspectives because their background, their experience, they don't have a many years experience like most of the functional leaders, only 1-2 years after graduate from school. So they think can be very different with us. And but other things, so I think for your example, doing the rotating thing is create a safety, psychological safety for people. Because if they are on the seat, their job is doing that, and they don't feel uncomfortable if they share. So I think for us, because we have the culture, it's all quite open for people to share. So that's not the most problem for us, especially when we introduce the young people in the leadership team, and then we force ourselves to get a different perspective. And then their job is to give us different perspective, and also sometimes help to spread the news or some truths to the office, which we do regularly anyway. But as they are people in addition to the functional leaders, and they go back to their teams, or people probably other their friends in the company are more comfortable talking to them, so they can share more. So those news are spread in different channels as well. So I think this is also one of the things I feel we really did well. And even after I handed over the MD role, they're still doing. So every year select a few, 4 or 5 people, and to be the leadership team member.
What a wonderful example of, again, recognizing this concept of informal leadership and influence, right? I think that's incredible. I kind of want to go to a slightly different space now. So Thoughtworks has a really good reputation in the industry. And if you just scour LinkedIn, right, it's amazing how many people in their LinkedIn profile will list that I am an ex-thought worker. So even after they've left, right, they like to say, oh, I have worked there, because it brings a certain amount of street credibility, right? So there are sort of two sides to the sword always. And people love it, right? There is credibility that comes from having worked with Thoughtworks. But in some interviews, right, people have also said that the culture at Thoughtworks is so strong. And you've referred to this in our interview as well, where you said there's some core values that are really important. And some of them have said that there is almost a cult-like aspect to being at Thoughtworks. So I would really love to hear from you what your reaction is when you hear something like that, and also what are some challenges or benefits of having the type of strong culture that you have?
Yeah, everything has two folds, so certainly happy to share. And given my long experience in the company, 17 years, I did see a lot of see the evolution of the culture. The culture is not always the same. There will be some evolution. Even we don't really change that drastically. But over the years, I see certain things continue to remain, those are the really key things for us. But some other things we are shifting as well, because as grow, or we feel in the past we didn't describe that clearly, and then many people have their own stories, their interpretations. So then, which is truth. So we have to get better about how we describe that, so the new people can really learn what our real culture, what are really we advocate for. So I think the time when I joined 17 years ago, we had 3 words to describe our culture: attitude, aptitude, integrity. And then, it's very hard to understand, right? Only by 3 words. So to truly understand, you have to spend time in the organization, and not in one office, but people tell their own stories, have their own interpretation. Sometimes it's not that right. And then you go to a different office, they have different things. But I think over the time, we realize we have to give more stories behind, describe that in a better way. So we have described, develop more descriptions to what do those things really mean. And then the list of the words actually increased over the years. But then it became just too long. The list is a bit long. So we always publish those things on the website. And I think the good things, the culture characteristics or key value is not always coming from just the leadership team say, hey, those are our key values. Everyone, this is our value. You need to just comply with everything. Every time it's a feedback collection from the ground to see what do you truly believe with our culture. And then, so we actually, summarize from people's understanding. And we also take the chance to correct some of the wrong understanding as well. So that's how we always get the description involved. I think mostly the recent one was created several years ago. I really love this version. Short enough, 8 key values published on our website. And also we have our code of conduct, have a lot of descriptions about what kind of behaviors we expect from people. Actually, those things are also published on the website. So over the time, I think less and less ambiguities. If people join, if they interpret it in the wrong way, I think it's easy to find out what is really truth, because you can just search and find the real description and what does it really mean. Not by in the past only give you 3 words and then you can interpret those things by yourself. So now it's more specific. And also we do better onboarding. We have people to talk about the stories and explain those things. And then also there are places people can go to search and find the answers as well. So I think there are some key things about our culture. I'm not going to mention too many about the 8 values. It's just too long to describe. But something in there about integrity, this doesn't change. And then one thing also came up several years ago, we summarized as a global first, because we do encourage people to think about holistic optimization, not only their local optimization. So this is very different. And also autonomous teams, not autonomy for individuals, but autonomous as a team. So those are the key things. And also something representing our culture, not really in the key value, but we're a very flat organization. These values and culture really support us to run well, because they actually direct people's behavior. With those behavior, you can run more high-performing organization with a flat organization. We still have our hierarchies because you're a large organization. You need to have these, but it doesn't stop you from connecting with people who are not directly report to you or people are not in your country. So we encourage those kind of conversation, but there's other values to support them to do the right thing as well. Yeah. And I think the downside I have to also mention, because those culture, it's a little bit not something like a very strict rules. So you do have to spend effort to explain, communicate. If you just put a document there and never talk about that, never actually utilize these things for decision making or something, and then people just have their own stories. Things could go to the wrong way and then became really wrong. When they interpret it in the wrong way, so probably they do something not really good for the team, but they believe that's the culture. And then also they can advocate on internet, which is the not right thing as well. In the past, those things did happen. That's why we just trying to remove a lot of ambiguities as well and do more communications.
I love that. What I heard there from what you've shared is sort of this consistent attempt by the organization, right? You are consistently reviewing what your expressed and explicit cultural values are. There are attempts to revise it and update it every a few years, and that's fantastic. Communicating through stories, which is something that we do a lot of, right? Is what are the stories where these values come to life? And the thing that I heard there that I really love is it seems that you incorporate the values into decision making, right? Because so often people state values, but when it comes to actual decision making, there is a disconnect between the expressed organizational value and how the decisions are made. And I think that is that integrity piece coming through is how do you demonstrate through action and actual decision making that these values have been considered in how we make a decision. So that's incredible.
Yeah, since you mentioned this, I just want to share some practices. So one is in the global leadership development or any local leadership development, when they do their self-assessment, there are some of the format they can choose to use. And some of these assessment tools, including you assess yourself based on the company values. So you can see how well are you doing there, which area you want to do more, you want to support as well. The other side is we gradually want to incorporate these things into the performance review as well. as a guidance. So when you collect feedback, you can also collect feedback around this area. So those things always get quoted, get used. So it's not it's just like a paper put aside, and then you have them, and then you forgot about that. So those things, certainly a lot of organizations doing that. That's why their real culture is disconnected with what's on the website, what's on the paper. But for us, we keep kind of bring this back, and sometimes internal, those kind of recognition programs, small recognition, like you say, hey, this person is great. What kind of value he or she demonstrate? So that we can also utilize those kind of the key value or a few key value to say, hey, this person actually did really well to represent those values, and what were the stories about around them. So those are the practices we're using. I think many organizations better to think about try as well.
Thank you, Jessie. That's wonderful. So very quickly, you want to revisit now this wonderful promotion that you have been transitioning into over the past 2.5 months. So what does it mean for you to be Global CIO for Thoughtworks and have to try to do digital transformation for an organization whose entire sort of work is around supporting other people's digital transformation? How are you meeting some of the internal challenges? And when you're doing this role and you're working in this role, where does your own interest and curiosity actually lead?
Sure. So I think maybe let me to explain what does this role do, because CIO means different things in different companies. So in Thoughtworks, the CIO leads the internal IT, which we build tools for our own use, or we also buy tools. We do the maintenance integration as well. So everything we do is for our own use, because currently run a company cannot run without the IT, without the software, technology tools at all, right? So you have to have these things for yourself. But this is not extra. It's not an external facing role. It's really internal. But I think one thing is because as our business is do digital transformation for other organizations, building software for other organizations, and then so we need to be a role model for that too, right? So you can't say, hey, I provide service to you, but we are not doing well. So we continue to be the role model for our clients as how to run the internal IT. So one thing, what we advocate to our clients, was something we say, we eat our own dog food. We say this is good, and we use these things internally as well. So I think the other big challenge, like I mentioned, is the team is around the globe. They are not co-located, which is a big challenge. But it doesn't really, it's not only saying you have to co-locate everyone to be able to communicate well. There are some ways to do that, but it's just difficult and more effort and set up the right structure as well. So I think new challenges for me is the team is large. It's about 500 people around the globe, because as Thoughtworks continue to grow, and then the internal IT requirement also growing, and we need to have expanding the team as well. But in the future, also thinking about nonlinear growth. Do we continue to add people or doing different things? How can I build a continued state to have a high performing team, even the team get larger and also more distributed? How can I reduce the ambiguity in the organization so team can work in a better way? And because it's not only individual thing, it's a whole big system. How can you design the system correctly, right? Sometimes you see people are not performing. It's not the individual thing. From Edward Deming, right? So there's a really big quality guru. And then he actually said when there's a performance issue of individuals, probably only 3% of the reason is that the individuals really have a wrong attitude, wrong skills, etc. There's 97% of the chance is you haven't designed the system correctly. So people didn't really have the right environment, the right processes, or the right team to perform. So that's the big challenges for me. Need to continue to find what are the problems in the systems. How can I remove the blockers? How can I really find a pivot point to change the system when there's something not going well? So this is continuous effort. And also, how can we have a long-term thinking? You cannot only work on the things today. Have to keep aside about the future, where the organization is going, and even bring in some of the industry trend as well. And working closely with the other business functions and our CTO group. We also have a CTO group, is more client-facing, and working closely with them to build a long-term roadmap, the vision for the team, so that we can put the right effort and money on the right thing, and then make the right trade-offs as well. You cannot build everything, so you have to make the trade-offs. So I think those are so many things there, and but it's very interesting. Before I stepped into the role, I didn't really know that much. I feel something different. I'll learn things. But after I stepped into the role, I found, wow, that's a really interesting area. I can do a lot of things. And so that's something very exciting for me for the future.
Wonderful. Yes, absolutely. There is so much I hear from you and your personal story, even as you're talking about this transition into the Global CIO role of continuous learning, continuous pivots, and still finding a way to bring it back and make it relevant. And I just want to come back to one last point before we close, and that is, you've mentioned this concept of reducing ambiguity several times in this interview, and I mean, I really love to have you expand just a little bit more on that, because we're living in an uncertain world that gets ever more uncertain as it goes by, and ambiguity is a constant. So, as you've mentioned, as teams grow, you do need to reduce ambiguity so that there is alignment enough to proceed with a shared vision. So what is your take on how we have that balance between reducing ambiguity and, meeting, needs as they emerge?
Yeah. So I would actually I expected this question came up, because we always talk about you have to embrace that. So what I'm talking about is you don't have some ambiguity you can remove, just remove it. So then you let the team to focus on the things, the ambiguity you cannot, right? And then you can embrace them. For example, the ambiguity I'm talking about is when there are many teams has to collaborate, but if the team responsibility or accountability is not clear, and then nobody knows who is making decisions, and who should they talk to get things done, who is supporting who is facing the customer, who is doing other things. So those kind of ambiguity, you can remove. You don't have to have them there. If you have them there, those are the frictions, right? But if you remove these kind of ambiguity by defining about what's the purpose of the team, what are the expected behaviors, how we can let the team to have a feedback loop to make sure we can collaborate well. Because, I mentioned as a large team around the globe, they cannot be one team. There are multiple small teams. They divide by certain principles, how they work together. If you can remove those kind of ambiguities, the friction will be reduced significantly. So in that way, the team got stronger to handle the things which really those are ambiguity, which we have no way to remove them. And then in that way, they can use the right energy to do those kind of things instead of consuming a lot of energy to have the frictions inside the organization. Hope that makes sense.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jessie. So before we go, we have this thing where we wrap up the main salient points that have come from this interview. For me, one salient point that came through is do not be afraid to experiment, pivot, and think laterally, as you have displayed in your career. That was wonderful, the way you've tried different roles and learned different things, applied them across different spaces, and you're continuing to do so. Another one that came through for me is the importance really of the small gestures, right? And listening, and the value of a leader listening, opening up that space to allow for better listening to occur. And I really love this final point as well around how we manage ambiguity. Because yes, the future is uncertain and is going to get even more so, but saying that everything is uncertain is also not useful. So it's identifying where the ambiguity is necessary and where the ambiguity can actually be managed. So very amazing, salient takeaways for me. And I want to thank you for your time and for sharing your stories.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Yes, very glad to be here and discussing those topics which I'm very, very passionate at. So thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Salience Podcast. Please leave us a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Frontline Mind newsletter by visiting our website at frontlinemind.com. Have you got a topic you would like some more salience on? Send us a message on LinkedIn or email team@frontlinemind.com.